I'm Haley Taylor, and you're listening to the Rough Draft Diaries. We've got a lot to talk about on this episode of the Rough Draft Diaries Revisit, so we're going to jump right in. Today we're catching up with Dr. Jeffrey Reutter, who, when we last talked to him, that was back in 2017, he was the director of Ohio Sea Grant College Program, Stone Laboratory, and Center for Lake Erie Research at Ohio State University. But that was 3 years ago, and although Dr. Reutter has since retired, he was still ready and eager to give me an update on Lake Erie.
Let me give you a real good positive and then a real frustrating negative. Going back to we'll think about the Toledo water crisis when you couldn't drink the water for almost 3 days in the Toledo area, so 500,000 people. That was in 2014, August of 2014. Looking at the period between 2014 and now, we saw the worst harmful algal bloom ever in 2015. Saw a really bad one in 2017, another pretty bad one in 2019. We just got the forecast for this year's bloom, and this one is not going to be as bad as last year. It'll be somewhere between last year and 2018, but still well above our target. And so the real frustrating thing for me is we've seen no change, and that is incredibly frustrating. And we've also got lots of data that indicates that while the farmers, the agriculture community would like to do this with a voluntary approach, there's no evidence that the voluntary approach will work.
Okay, let's pause for a little recap before we move forward. Algal blooms on Lake Erie are caused mainly from agricultural runoff. That means the type of fertilizer and the amount used on a farm is ultimately being carried into the lake through heavy periods of rainfall. This boosts the level of phosphorus in the lake, which then feeds the microcystin, creating a toxic lake. Now, from our last interview, Dr. Reutter mentioned a few solutions to the problem. Option number 1 involves the farmers to voluntarily change the fertilizer used on their farm or to decrease the amount. If that's not possible, option number 2 involves the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, keeping farmers accountable by creating rules and guidelines that they have to follow in regards to fertilizer on their farms. Since our interview with Dr. Reutter 3 years ago, option number 1 and option number 2 have not been used. Nothing has changed, and the phosphorus levels in the lake remain the same.
I'm just incredibly disappointed. From 2015 to 2017, and what we saw is no net change in the implementation of best management practices by farmers voluntarily. About 12% of farmers started doing new best management practices. They hadn't been doing them, and they started doing them. But we also saw 12% that had been doing best management practices, and they stopped. We're not recommending that we harm agricultural production because everyone knows we need to produce a lot of food. But what we're seeing is that we're putting on way too much phosphorus. Where that is most evident is in animal operations. And the guidelines that we have for animal operations allow them to apply too much. And that we really need to change. And so far, we haven't gotten those. And that I just see as being, again, very disappointing.
But Dr. Reutter did mention he had a positive to the negative. Over the course of these past 3 years, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine has created a new 10-year program called H2O Ohio, which will provide financial support to Ohio EPA, Ohio Department of Agriculture, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. With extra support, these departments can focus on creating solutions for the lake. And with 2 years of this 10-year plan already fully funded, they've already started getting to work.
The Ohio Department of Natural Resources is working to create lots of wetlands in key areas around Lake Erie and in the Maumee River watershed. We can get those wetlands to remove nutrients, and we could see a nutrient reduction of 10%. So it's not going to solve the problem, but it's very much a step in the right direction because we need a 40% reduction. And we have Ohio Department of Agriculture working with farmers to try to get farmers to adopt about 10 different behaviors and literally pay them to make those changes. It's going to take a little bit of time to see how effective this is going to be. But, I think the H2 Ohio program and what Governor DeWine's trying to do, to me, that's a real positive action.
So even though we haven't made any substantial changes in regards to cleaning up the lake, Dr. Reutter thinks the future looks bright.
I do have a sense of hope. Our target here in reducing the load, say, by 40%, reducing the concentration of the phosphorus going in by 40%, this is very much achievable. Yeah, the H2 Ohio program from Governor DeWine is encouraging for me. I think it's definitely, I think we're headed in the right direction.
I'm Haley Taylor, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Rough Draft Diaries.